don't know.
But I would say this. If you have a remote viewer and they're very good at their job and
Yeah.
they're asked to look at a place and you've got a timeline or you've got a large event that is impending and they come there on the sunny day and they don't feel, by looking at the place, they don't get the overwhelming desire to pull back a day or two just because they're sensing something impending, then they're not probably very good at their job. Now, what I would like to do again is to go.
No, actually, Kerry, let me just mention here.
Okay.
There's variety in all remote viewers, no matter how good they are.
Okay.
Meaning, when people go into a session, you're never going to get 100% perfect descriptions of what a situation is with every viewer, even if the viewer is the best on the planet. There's always, for every viewer, there will always be variation across sessions and across targets, and it just happens. Just like with any piano player that works on Carnegie Hall and the Boston Pops or whatever, some performances are going to be just different of the exact same piece that they're playing. They'll be different than other performances. There won't be, everything won't be the same.
Yeah,
so there is going to be natural variation.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I just want to drill down to this sort of, so that the point gets made, though, that the other, so that we've got 18 that don't show worth changes. The other 17, you've shown us one example, right, of the 18. The other 17, would you say that they reflect a similar, looking at this same day, place, in the timeline? Were they similar to this, or were there a few that kind of showed impending something, but they couldn't describe it, or, in other words,
no, we have other sessions
to each other
for this particular target that clearly have disaster content.
Okay, but what I'm saying is you've divided 20 from 18, right? We've got 38 together.
Yeah.
You've said 20 show disaster and 18 don't. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what I'm asking is, of the 18, you showed us one, and now what I'm asking is, the other 17, do they look a lot like hers, or is there a great variety within those 17 that don't show disaster, is what I'm asking. And I don't want you to show me anything specific. I just want you to generalize over those 17, because we actually don't have time now. We've been going.
Yeah, it's they're similar in the sense that they don't have disaster. They are different in the sense that they show aspects of the island, but maybe are different aspects. But you clearly see they're still on an island someplace.
Okay, but are they all? But none of them, for example. I mean, let's if we're going to have gradations of disaster, then are any of them approaching disaster, or are none of them? Are they all 18 sunny days, for example?
No, there's variations. In fact, what I do is I score them on a scale from 0 to 3 in terms of the quantity of disaster. A 0 means there's no disaster content at all. And the session we just showed you from Deborah Duggan Takagi was scored as a 0.
Right.
Meaning I scored her in terms of accuracy, describing what would have to be there under any circumstances on Tuvalu, like an island. It would have to be an island, and so on. I just scored her that as a 3, which is the highest score you can get. But in terms of disaster content, I scored that session as a 0. For other sessions, the disaster content can go up to a 3, so it's 0, 1, 2, 3. A 1 shows some disaster content, but not a lot, but it makes me raise my eyebrows. But, nothing to write home about. 2 is very significant disaster content, like, wow.
So a 2 would have fallen into the group of 20. If you hit 2.
Yes, and a 3 is an absolute total wipeout.
Okay.
And so I have, for these sessions, I have 0s, 1s, 2s, and 3s. So we have a full gradation. Now the real question is, to approach the analysis for something like this, I then ask, well, let's break this down into a crude measure that will give us a binary conclusion, yes or no. And so I say, let's group the 2s and 3s together. the sessions that are scored as 2 and the sessions that are scored as 3, because those are very significant disaster things. And that's what I meant when I said there were 20. That meant for timeline A, where the scientific community refuses to acknowledge or acknowledge the reality of remote viewing, I said basically that there is 20 sessions out of the 38 for timeline A that scored a 2 or a 3 with that disaster content. Now, remember, when we're saying 38 sessions, we're talking just about timeline A. Timeline B had 38, and timeline and 2008 had 37. We had a total of 113 sessions for one project, which, to my understanding, is the largest collection of military-grade remote viewing for any single project.
Oh, really?
And,
okay.
Yeah, ever. I mean, ever done any time, ever. And so when you're looking at this, what I'm doing is saying, see, you're comparing the 20 to the 18, the 20 with disaster content to the 18 without. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm looking at the disaster content in the 2013 timeline versus the 2008. So what I'm looking at is the 20 versus the 2.
Oh, I see.
I'm looking at 20 versus 2. And that's...
yeah, no, it's
the difference is huge.
Very good to drill down this way, and I appreciate that. Very, very interesting. Now, at this point, Courtney, and I thank you because you've been wonderful. We've got you going for 2 hours straight here without even a break, and I want to give you the possibility of a break. And then what I'd like to do, and that's up to you.
I'm okay. I can keep on going straight if you'd like. Okay,
it's your choice. And then what I'd like to do is start taking some questions from the crowd.
Sure.
Other than giving you the opportunity, if you'd like, before we go there, to do some wrap-up comments, to put all.
That's really a nice thing that you ask. Can I sort of before we go to questions, can I sort of mention what sort of odd things that the government's doing that makes me think that maybe there's something real to these data?
Absolutely. I would love you to start to draw your own conclusions, do whatever, go where you like, and take whatever time you need to do so.
Now remember, notice how I just stated that. I am not getting on late night radio and saying, prepare for the kill shot.
Right.
I said, if these data are correct. Meaning, you've been a spectacular host, because you've been asking the really pointed questions that really helped me to focus in on things that illustrated these things better than I've ever had a chance before. So I really appreciate you a great deal. So, what I'm saying is, I'm not making a firm prediction. We do have a situation of multiple realities. That's actually another whole project that we did. Again, that is on the DVD, the Farsight Experiments, too. So, but now let's go into a situation where, if this is a probable future, not an exact predicted deterministic future, but if this is a probable future that may be very real as a possibility in our future time stream, meaning if my theory is correct, and I think it is, that such an event that is of such global proportions would affect so many timelines that it would become like a juggernaut, and everybody would have to go through it. Well, that all timelines would sort of funnel through it. Well, then the government would know something about this. And so let's just look. Now, believe me, I'm not doing this in an accusatory manner of the government at all. I'm doing this in a scientific manner by saying, let's use them as sort of guinea pigs, sort of the canaries, if you will. Let's see what they're doing and see if they are giving us any indication that something may be up. Should we believe our data? Because if we do want to believe our data, then the government would already know about this, and they should be doing things that are anomalous. So look at these anomalous behaviors that I had done. Now, mind you, this is not scientific, because it is not scientific for me to pick the data that fit my theory. So what I'm going to do is, in this particular part of the presentation, is to pick some data that fit my theory. So that's not scientific. Scientific stuff can't do that. You have to collect all of the data and then do an analysis to see how it pops out, just like we did with the session data that we were just going through. But sometimes picking the data that fit your theory is very helpful when the data are sticking its thumb right in your eye. For example, let us say you go home and you are entering the front door and you say, something feels weird about this. And then you walk into your bedroom and you see a gorilla in your bedroom. And then you come out and you say, I was right. You see, there was something weird. There's a gorilla in my bedroom. Now, that's not scientific because you're picking your data. Data, in terms of science, you should have done an analysis of each room, collected your data, sorted through everything, and then finally noticed that there was a gorilla in the bedroom. But you know, going into your bedroom and noticing that there was a gorilla, that was good enough. You really didn't need to go any further. So while this is not scientific, these examples, in my view, are like the gorilla in your bedroom. Okay, so here they are. The U.S. Space Shuttle program is ended. The U.S. has completely shut down its entire government-funded manned spaceflight program. This goes all the way back to Mercury. This goes back to the Apollo. All of the decades of investment we have put into manned spaceflight, and they just shut it down. And then they announced it like, oh my gosh, we simply forgot that we don't have a replacement for the shuttle. You know how many PhDs work for NASA? They have to pay their mortgages. Is it really reasonable that all those smart PhDs simply forgot that they weren't going to have a replacement for the shuttle? And they don't even have something building. So they have some things that they're thinking might be on the drawing board. But basically, it looks like, this is me interpreting now, it looks like they've decided that they're not going to be able to, for some reason, be in space for a while. And they're just shutting it all down. That's what it looks like. It's just not believable to me to think that they actually just forgot that they didn't have a replacement for the shuttle. That's just not a credible thing for me. Okay. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault. It was just recently sealed. That will enable the world to start its agriculture given a global catastrophe. Now, this is a Norwegian project. For a Norwegian project, why did the head of the United Nations and his entire team go to inspect the facility? And the timing seems odd. Why rush it and seal it before the end of 2012? I mean, it's just like, and the Global Seed Vault is precisely designed to restart global agriculture. Why seal it now? Why not just piddle around and just sort of collect? Why not keep on just constantly putting in new seeds? And so the timing is weird for building it and sealing it.
Okay.
Okay, now the U.S. and global debt. It's as if the various governments are not expecting to have to pay back their debt. There's no way the U.S. can pay back this debt. So it looks like they're expecting or anticipating some type of global economic reset for reasons not currently stated. It looks like the European Union economic structure is going to fall apart to some degree at least. And even the International Monetary Fund is thinking of moving away. Oh, that allows us to move to the dollar. There's a movement away from the dollar. It's as if they're planning on abandoning the dollar as an international currency. The U.S. Treasury bonds, Moody, Standard & Poor, and Fitch have all three announced that they are considering devaluing the rating of the U.S. Treasury bonds. And you can read about that in a New York Times article for the 15th of March, 2010, as well as an editorial on the 20th of March, same year. And there's discussions within the United Nations of the International Monetary Fund phasing out its dependency on the U.S. dollar. So the governments are acting as if the dollar is not going to be around, that they're not going to be trying to save it. Okay, now the next thing. Everybody's digging. Now the U.S. has no nuclear enemies, but it is placing underground facilities, has already placed underground facilities, huge underground facilities in the inhospitable West, in places where it's very hard for the masses to reach. But we tend to think in terms of protecting our military and the elite. Now, the Chinese and the Russians tend to think collectively. Now, I'm not making criticisms of any side. I'm just saying that historically the Chinese and the Russians tend to think collectively, going back, in the Russians' days, going back to Napoleon's invasions. They always think in terms of, saving the motherland and the masses of the people. So the Chinese are digging also, but they're digging extraordinary subway complexes up to 200 miles per year under each of their major cities. You can read about this, for example, in a New York Times article by Keith Bradshaw, 27 of March, 2009. And these subways are sometimes going out to nowhere. They're just going out. And they're building them 24 hours a day, non-stop shifts. There's no breaks. And it's a crash program. And we have been trying for like a decade to add 1.5 miles to the New York subway system. They're putting up to 200 miles per year under each of their cities. Now, subways are very convenient places for, they're underground tunnels, and they can house millions of people, and they're doing them in the cities. But now let's look at Russia. In 2011, it decided it was going to add 5,000 new nuclear bomb shelters in Moscow. And that would enable it to protect all of Moscow's residents. They already have about 5,000 nuclear bomb shelters, so they're doubling that. And it's all being finished this year. Now, Russia, as with the United States and China, there are no nuclear enemies. So why this crash program to add nuclear bomb shelters all throughout Moscow? In addition, Russia's subway systems were built deeper than normal so that they can be used as emergency shelters also. So with no nuclear enemies, why are these people spending, including the U.S., spending all of this money to bury themselves? And so, and now let's look at NASA. And then look at NASA. NASA has been predicting, it's almost weekly these days, that the sun is going to be generating unprecedented solar storms for a lengthy period in 2010 and 2012 and 2013, the post-2013 time period. You can even hear Michio Kaku talking about this on Fox News in a YouTube video. People can just go and look at 2012 Michio Kaku and hear him talking about it. And basically what they're talking about is something called Carrington events, where the sun acts up so much, as it did in 1859 for 3 days, where there was a big flare, and we only had telegraph systems back then, and there were actually 1-inch sparks that flew off the wires, and the telegraph operators were actually sparked and shocked by these things. And so it basically took down our telegraph system, but that's all we had back in 1859. And it was a scientist named Carrington who connected the solar flare to this thing. And now NASA is saying that we're going to be experiencing unprecedented such things in 2013, and that we should harden our satellites and prepare for a possible blowout of the electric grid, as well as telecommunications and so on. Now, Kerry, we predict things based on past behavior. How can they predict something that is unprecedented? We can't even predict the weather on Earth a week in advance. And they're taking years in advance, and they're saying this is going to be unprecedented stuff that's going to potentially take down our grid. And it says, and they're saying, well, it's sort of connected to the 11-year solar cycle. But we had lots of computers back in 1990 and in 2001 when that 11-year cycle hit. This is going to be unprecedented, they're saying. And so it's odd that NASA would be saying that. So these are sort of anomalous behaviors. And I have one last that's sort of really weird, and this is sort of out there. So I don't know really what to think about this. It's too sort of shocking for me to think about. But I just have been looking at a lot of the data coming in from the Fukushima plant in Japan, the damaged nuclear reactor. Even you can see a YouTube video of General Albert Stubblebine talking about what's going on at the Fukushima plant. What apparently is happening is that it has 6 reactors at the Fukushima plant. They were all damaged, destroyed, but reactor number 4 apparently is the one that's really the problem, and they have a lot of spent fuel in reactor number 4, and apparently the spent fuel is in a building and it's put 100 feet up into the building, like it's not on the ground floor, it's up. And apparently that structure has been rated a 0 in seismic strength, so even a small rocker of an earthquake will basically bring the building tumbling down. And that means all of these spent fuel rods would just come crashing to earth. And a lot of people that seem to know what they're talking about are saying that this is simply going to happen, and that when this happens, it will produce a level of radiation emission that's 85 times the size of Chernobyl, and you're talking about something that may be absolutely devastating on a planetary level. Okay, now I'm not going to get into whether this is correct or not correct, but I am going to say one thing about it. Even if it's remotely possible, don't you think the US government and the Japanese government would be pulling out every possible stop there could be to do something? That they would have a massive program to, even if it looked like there was nothing they could do, they would still be doing something. They wouldn't just be watching it. Well, what's happening is, apparently, from what I'm gathering, is nobody's doing anything. So how do I interpret that? It's very hard. There's only 2 interpretations that I can think of. Now, I could be wrong. Please repeat that in your minds 1,000 times. I could be wrong. But the only 2 interpretations that I can figure out is they're either totally incompetent or they're planning on something bad happening anyway, and they're saying, what does it matter?
Wow, yeah.
That's now, Kerry, let me ask you a question. Let me flip it. Can you come up with a different reason?
No, but what I do have a few other reasons that I think is going on, which I do talk about, and you and I could kick that around as well. But
could you just mention a couple, just for the sake of just...
Before I do that, I just want to know if you also made the same sort of conclusion around the Gulf oil spill that they're also doing nothing about.
No, that seemed to me a typical example of incompetence and habitual secrecy, sort of combining together into a vaudeville act that just went astray and was just nutty. No, this Fukushima plant, from what I'm seeing, and I could be wrong, 'cause I'm not a nuclear expert, but this does seem to be a major possibility for a bad day. And under normal circumstances, you'd see a crash program where absolutely every resource possible would be thrown into it to fix it. Now, what I'm hearing is that nothing is being done, like literally nothing. Nothing. They're just watching it. And that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. That's how I'm interpreting it. Anyway, so I gave you a bunch of what I consider anomalous behaviors, which makes me think that there might be something to these remote viewing data, because these anomalous behaviors match what I would expect the government to do if they were thinking the remote viewing data were accurate.
Okay, well that is, just a wonderful overview and said so very sort of without rancor and without sort of judgment thrown in, and in a very refreshing way, but at the same time still driving the points home, which people can just add up these things, and they do come down to a very questionable conclusion. And it is possible that your data is at least one explanation for why they are doing all of those things, certainly.
And Kerry, can I say one more thing?
That makes logical sense. Go right.
From a remote viewing perspective, let's say nothing happens in 2013. Let's consider that a complete possibility. So let's say nothing happens in 2013. We still have a puzzle. Why did all of this disaster content show up in these data when everything was controlled perfectly with a total perfect randomization process where no viewer could know whether they were doing a 2008 or a 2013 session? Why did it happen? I mean, it's a real interesting scientific puzzle. Either there's something really going on with the timelines, which we'll find out in just a little while. We don't have long to wait. I'm almost at the point of saying this is such a great thing that we're going to learn so much. You know, the real purpose of this experiment at this point is really much bigger than most people might think, because really, if we're correct in this, let's not worry too much about the disaster content. Let's just worry about the scientific finding itself. If we're correct in this, that means for the very first time, we will be able to say that we have a possible means of navigating the future. Rather than just marching, what we're doing right now is we're marching into the future blind, with like blindfolds over our eyes, not seeing what's going to hit us, and whatever hits us from the future. Now, for the first time, we're able to say we're going to march into the future, but we have the ability to look at various timelines, and at least we can discern biggies, big things, and if we don't like what we see, we can steer in another direction in advance. That makes us able to see. We have eyes for the first time moving into the future. So, yes, the disaster content is a little unnerving, but we have to wait to see if it turns out correct. But if it does, it's a eureka moment. So, yes, we have the disaster to deal with, but on the other hand, for future disasters and for future other things, we at least have sight now. We were blind before, and we have sight. We can actually move into the future knowing something about the future. And Kerry, let me say one more thing. This makes us more like the ETs, the extraterrestrials, who have these capabilities, apparently technologically, to move back and forth in time. However, just look at it. Our particular mix, the human mix, all reports that you hear from extraterrestrials indicate that they have technology for moving in time, but also technology, also sort of very fluent psychic abilities like telepathy and so on. Imagine, if we're correct, how the ETs would be looking at humans. Humans who have a built-in inhibition to not being able to do this are now able to do this. If I was an ET, I would be sitting on the edge of my ship and I'm saying, wow, those humans are amazing. That they could do that in human form is like the biggest show in town. So I'm started thinking that we're a real spectacle, and that if we are successful in this, it will be a story that will span the galaxy. That's how I'm looking at this.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Very, very interesting sort of tour de force of remote viewing and all of the information around this project that you put out for us to analyze and to discuss and to mull over. And I'm sure that this video is going to have some life after tonight as well out there for people to want to look at it. And people that even haven't had the time to see it and join us tonight on these hours. Now, what I'd like to do is go to some questions that have been coming in from out in the cosmos here.
Sure.
And we've got a couple of chat rooms, and we also, I believe, we still also have phone lines, if I'm correct. So if I know that at this point we're past my American Freedom Radio show, so they probably, I don't know that they're still listening. I'm thinking perhaps they're not. I know that American Freedom Radio is still online. Well, no, it says American Freedom Radio is still got this going on as well. So we've got a radio audience who haven't paid to see the video, so those people are are not seeing the visuals, but maybe they'll see it after the fact. And then we still, but that, you know, we've got quite an audience here. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I've asked to have all of the questions gathered from the chat and put into one chat sort of session here with me, if that can be done all together. I don't know if we've got that or not. I'm going to kind of scroll back here. And here's a very good question. And believe me, I have many more questions for you, but I am going to let other people ask some questions here. So the first question I get here in the chat is, can observing an object using remote viewing change its timeline properties?
Oh, that's the whole purpose. That's the whole idea of this experiment. If you see, we have momentum. We're moving forward in time. So that's what brings us probability with our future timelines. Because if everything possible could happen, then the physicists had been stumped for a long while, saying if everything possible can happen, and that's what their quantum experiment suggests, then why would you have probability? Just there'd be an equal chance of everything. But our past conditions, it gives us a momentum for a certain set of things to happen in the future. For example, it is very unlikely that I'm going to, in the next few seconds, take off all my clothes and scream around and run out the house and things like that. It is much more likely, trust me, I've never done such a thing, and I probably will never, ever, hopefully never do such a thing, but it is much more likely that I'm going to continue to sit in my seat and talk to the audience. So there's momentum in my past that is bringing me into a more likely future. It's very unlikely that I'm going to suddenly grab a fish sandwich and eat it right in front of you. You get the idea? Some things are just not likely, and some things are more likely.
Yeah.
I'm vegetarian anyway, so I don't normally eat fish. But the point is that there is a momentum. And so when we look at certain things in our future, by looking at different timelines, we are literally seeing things that are possible for us. So even though there are certain things that are more likely than other things, we nonetheless can say that there are a variety of different things that are still within the range of possible. Now, you could say that almost anything is possible, but some things are much more likely than others. Within the range of the more likely, there's still a bunch of things. So if we look at those things, we then bring that information from the future back into the past, which is now, and then say, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to experience future A, or do we want to experience future B? So that's where we're bringing information back, and thus we are going to then take our particular timeline and derive it, move it in one direction or another. Now, that doesn't say that the future that you saw, let's say we want to go in direction of future B, and we don't want to go in direction of future A. That doesn't mean that future A doesn't happen. It is as real as future B. It just means that we, in our particular timeline, will not experience future A, but another version of us will. So, yes, we are manipulating our futures by looking at remote viewing in the future.
Okay, very, very interesting. I mean, it's quite a fascinating subject, no doubt about it. Another person asking, do you have any information regarding Project Looking Glass?
Remind me of that. I know it. Well, I know it. I just forget it.
Dan Burish talked a lot about Project Looking Glass, which is basically technology that was taken from the Sumerian tablets, supposedly, by the government and created to look at probable futures and put into a computer, and basically, you know, it's a form of ET technology when all said and done.
Yeah, you reminded me, and now I remember the whole thing. No, we don't have any information on that. Really, what we do is just remote viewing studies, our own stuff. And one of the things that we don't do, and partly because I work with military people, I mean, Lynn Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton are military people. And they also work with military people. And when I go to the International Remote Viewing Association meetings in a few days, I'm surrounded by military people. And one of the things we decided long ago was just simply not to start projects where we're dealing with governmental or military secrets. So we go after other things that there's plenty of other things to do. And so going into sort of military governmental secrecy stuff, it raises the eyebrows of the military and the governmental people, and they get upset with us, and so we don't like to get into that energy. So we said we'll go into other things. So the looking glass thing is similar to, say, what's under Area 51. I mean, it'd be as easy as day for us to do a complete analysis of what's under Area 51. We just don't go there.
Okay, but let me actually ask a corollary question to that,
okay,
because it does beg the question slightly as to the information you are getting if most of these viewers are military remote viewers.
Well, actually, the viewers are not military remote viewers. They're second generation, meaning they're civilian, but they're taught in groups, and the lead trainer, the lead person organizing the whole groups, are Lynn Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton. There are some people that were trained by me in scientific remote viewing that have worked with us also in some of our projects.
Okay.
But the primary groups that we work with right now are HRVG and CRV.
Okay.
So, but the viewers themselves are not military people.
Military. Okay, but just for the sake of argument, let me ask you this, because it is very interesting, you know, being Camelot and being that we interview whistleblowers from black projects.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What we come across all the time is an overlay that comes from the military that involves a sort of programming that goes on that has to do with sort of convincing them that there is a catastrophic timeline that they are preparing for and that is very real potential future for humanity. And every whistleblower that we've had, almost without exception, has seen this and been taught this in the military.
Yeah.
And what happens is it possible that your viewers are being skewed by the people that have trained them having this overlay?
Well, I can say that the types of targets that Lynn Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton offer their viewers typically are what we call validation targets, or normal type targets. The targets they often give them are really quite boring as far as I'm concerned. They're really just targets of places and things. The other thing is that Glenn Wheaton and Lynn Buchanan did not design this project. I am civilian totally, and I designed this project.
Okay.
And they didn't have any input at all into the choice of the targets. I did everything.
Okay, well, yeah, and that's very interesting. So it lessens the likelihood. There's also I have to answer the question to some degree and ask you to verify for me, but in a certain sense, in going through and becoming a remote viewer who is then sort of part of this team that you have, they actually have been vetted thoroughly such that the overlay or the tendency for overlay or prejudice in certain areas, in other words, kind of like what we were talking about, what they will look at and what they won't look at, you must have sort of filtered them out a long time ago for these kinds of
No, the only type of stuff that I do notice in terms of the viewers are supposed to watch report whatever they get. But the only thing I have noticed is that Lynn Buchanan's viewers are typically kept away from really bloody, gruesome targets. And that's because Lynn Buchanan believes that these types of targets can be traumatic to the nervous system, and he doesn't like to expose his viewers to those types of targets without their permission, because they have to do everything blind. And So that's the only thing. Now, you don't get that with the HRVG. They have a wider range of targets that they're willing to expose their viewers to. But that's the only type of sort of boundaries that I personally have seen among those two groups of viewers. And they're, we're not talking a lot of people. We're talking less than 20 for total.
Okay.
By the way, Kerry, that should be raising more fear than anything else. The very fact that we only have fewer than 20 and there's not a lot of ongoing training going on right now means that this planetary capability that we've developed it's like dancing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. There's not much there in terms of numbers, and so we really should be having 2,500 really great viewers, not so few. But we're working on trying to solve that. We have a training program that I'm trying to start up in Africa, believe it or not, which will solve some of the problems that we've encountered when training in the United States. But that's for another show.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Interesting suggestion there of a few questions in my mind, anyway. All right, someone is asking whether or not any of the, I want to find the exact wording of the question if I can get it right. It has to do with, did anyone view underground government bunkers? And
no, that's one of the things we stay away from. We know that they exist. We even know where they are. But we stay away from them because the government doesn't want us to do that. You have to understand, I have really been a thoroughly exposed to and understand and experienced what happens when the government goes after you. And they try to, basically what they try to do is attack your credibility. And they have resources that go way beyond anything that we have. And they have no constraints either. The people that they have doing that can do anything. And so, and they can, typically this occurs in terms of set up an ambush, often with regard to media shows. And the resources that they have to set up an ambush with media shows are just incredible. But they can destroy someone's credibility in the blink of an eye. Actually, it takes a couple months. They're very patient in doing that. So one of the things that we do in order to avoid that type of thing is we say, okay, look, if you know that there is a bear in the woods and he lives over there next to that cave, then it makes sense not to go over to that cave and throw a rock in it. And so what we do is we say, okay, there's certain things that we know the government doesn't want us to do. Now, they're not maybe really overjoyed with the other things we're doing, but at least we're not poking our nose into their areas and throwing a rock at it. And so one of the things they really don't want us to do is to give detailed analyses of their own projects. And so these underground facilities, we know where they are. We could target them at a blink of an eye. We don't even get close to that.
Let me ask you another version of the same question, just for argument's sake.
And let me answer, Kerry. It's okay if you get upset with me with regard to that. I know we're copping out with regard to that, but we really don't find governmental secret stuff to be very interesting either. It's like, why go there? Why get involved with that energy when we're investigating civilizations on Mars. We're investigating exploding planets in our own solar system. We're investigating multiple realities. This is way more interesting than a few silly labs they have under some base.
Sure. Well, okay, but it actually, what the list you've just given us are things that actually I think that they would also have a problem with. But let's ask this in those terms, because if you've got somebody who's asked to remote view these locations, and look, you're asked to remote view a location. If you see something, you see something. You know what I mean? And one of the things that happens during earth changes, and one of the questions that people have often had is, are those underground bases really going to stay intact during some of these earth changes?
Oh, no, Kerry, this is something so interesting that you're raising. Can I answer this in a little differently?
Sure.
Because now I have to say this is my own personal interpretation. based on everything that I study, I actually don't think those underground bases are going to save anybody. I don't think they're worth a dime. And this is why. You see, this goes to some of the stuff that we talked about in an interview we had a while back on Revolution Radio on the quantum mechanics. I hope one day you do get to ask me back on something where I can just talk about physics, just for the record, just so people
I'd
can
be
see it.
absolutely delighted to do it.
And even if it did go over some people's head, I'm pretty good at making connections so that people get it, making analogies and making it sort of understandable. A popularizer of remote viewing physics, you might call me in some way. Anyway, so just like, let's say Brian Greene is a popularizer of string theory, I'm a popularizer of the physics of remote viewing. But what I'm actually thinking is happening, and this is my sort of guess at interpreting everything that I see happening, I actually think that what's going on now is actually very similar to what you hear people sometimes talking about as a shift from third density to fourth density. And basically what that means, this refers to something that we talked about in our first discussion on Revolution Radio, where scientists, quantum mechanics, actually all physicists, made a basic mistake. They assumed that the frequencies that compose all that exists can only form into quantum superpositions that produce quantum particles but also aggregate up into us in a narrow band within the electromagnetic spectrum that corresponds to visible light. And anything outside of that narrow band simply doesn't exist. You only have some particles out there, but you don't get aggregations like planets, people, us. That was a big mistake, and they have absolutely no reason to make that assumption. It's not a scientific postulate, it's a theological postulate. They want to believe that they are unique. The reality is, the same principles mathematically can happen anywhere along the frequency spectrum. There is nothing saying that frequencies can't combine into states of superposition to produce subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, people, planets, elsewhere in the electromagnetic frequency, in the electromagnetic spectrum, higher up. And so, my thought is that when we talk about multiple realities, we're really talking about a probability density function, or a probable space that covers higher frequencies and lower frequencies of us, so that there is a version of Earth that vibrates a bit higher, literally on the electromagnetic spectrum, than the version that we're seeing. And what I think may be happening in the post-2012 period is essentially a shift in the aggregate frequency of the planet for reasons that really we don't have any remote viewing data for, but I have other reasons to think about this as a possibility. I think what's happening is that the planet is entering a phase that happens apparently every 180 million years or so. The whole solar system is entering a phase where the radiation mix, or the mix of frequencies that compose all of us, is getting a bit of an extra bang for the buck. There apparently is some area within the galaxy that we're passing through that has a little bit of different of a frequency mix than the normal stuff that we pass through. And when that frequency mix, we might consider it radiation coming out from the center of the galaxy, when that, like a spoke in a wheel, when that frequency mix gets added to us, it changes everything. It changes, it's like a piano where you, actually it's like an electronic piano, electronic keyboard, where it has a little dial on the side, and you hit the C, the middle C, and it gives you a nice note, ding, and then you push the dial, and it goes ding. It sort of pushes it up a little bit, you bias it a little bit. That's what I think is happening, that some extra frequencies are being added to the mix, and that the overall stuff is different. Now, the people who are vibrating a little lower, are characterized, not in terms of good and bad, but they are characterized in being, because of the nature of the physics that I talked about in our first discussion, one of the characteristics or side effects of that slightly lower vibration is that they experience reality in a more narrow band of the overall frequency mix of the electromagnetic spectrum. So basically what they get is a very narrow band perception of themselves, which means that they get cut off from sort of a telepathic connection with other people, other things, and they feel more isolated. And they also have a sense of being cut off from their history. So they have an amnesia of who they are, where they came from. Those are characteristics. Now, that doesn't mean that they're bad. It's just a characteristics of the nature of the physics of their state. And it would take a number of hours for me to explain the whole physics of this. But this is sort of a general overview of the symptoms. And so for people who are at that lower frequency, feeling more cut off, they tend to look at the world, because of their sense of isolation and deeper sense of amnesia, because of the way the frequencies come together, they tend to look at the world in terms of polarized experiences, good, bad, two arms, left, right, two eyes, left, right, everything is good, a friend, enemy. And when you look at CNN, you see that all the time. You see all the news stories of this person's a friend, that most people are enemies, fear, paranoia, that type of thing. Now, the people who are vibrating at that frequency, that's how they see the world. Now, let us say that the entire world does actually shift in some way. Again, I'm not referring to remote viewing. This is my own sort of interpretation of what I think is going on. Let us say that our entire frequency mix changes a little bit, so because of some cosmic cycle. And the whole Earth starts to vibrate because of the frequency blend of frequencies that compose all of us, these new ingredients, they start to vibrate a little higher. Well, the people that are locked into a lower frequency that produces more polarized thinking, high emotional states, looking at the world as good and bad, those people aren't going to be compatible with that higher frequency, because that higher frequency will lift them out of that state of amnesia slightly and that sense of being cut off from everybody else. So it literally changes their mix. And if their personalities are not ready for that higher state, then they literally can't exist in that higher state. And so what does that mean? What that would actually mean is the way we navigate through probabilities, probable events and existences here, seems to be through navigating through events. So what we end up doing is, when we need to do something at a deep level, we find an event that takes us there. Thus, in that interpretation, there is no such thing as dying by accident. Literally everybody dies as a matter of suicide. There is no exception to that. Everyone on some deep level has to, on the level of frequency, experience what they are compatible with. And so all deaths on some deep level have to be a voluntary experience. And that would mean that people, perhaps in large numbers, may have to seek out events that will let them withdraw from an Earth environment that's no longer compatible with their vibratory state, with their level. If they're vibrating at this level and suddenly the entire Earth shifts up ever so slightly, they're not there. So they have to find events that get them out. And then they can, say, show up again in another planet somewhere else that vibrates at that exact third density level where they're more comfortable, and then can work on whatever issues till they finally get to the point of wanting to integrate themselves. And as they want to integrate, they're going to start wanting to reach up, and they will find events that helps them to reach up, perhaps learning to meditate, things like that, that helps us that draws them to extend themselves upward, and then they will start vibrating at that higher level, and they will find events that allow them to get to that level. My own personal thought is that one of the reasons we have a population explosion on the planet right now, and this is one of the things that I sort of think about, is because we may be entering that spiral spoke in the galaxy where an extra set of radiation frequencies get added to the mix. And if that's true, that would help a whole bunch of people, even if remotely, even if they're not ready to move up and have to exit. It would still help them a little bit because they would have experienced that higher frequency even to some degree and helped them in their own evolutionary spiral upwards. So that's one of the reasons I think we have a population explosion on the planet right now. I think a lot of people want to be here right now because of what's going on. You understand that if we do have significant Earth changes, if these data are correct, and I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that they may not be correct, and I may be on your show a year from now saying, well, nothing happened, Kerry. It looks like we learned something, but I'm not sure what we learned, so that may happen too. But what I think is happening is that these changes have a high probability of occurring in our timeline, and that these changes should not be looked at from the perspective of disaster, but as a perspective of great growth. The Earth very likely is going through some very significant changes. And when it does go through these changes, it will vibrate differently. And the possibility exists that the human civilization that continues with this planet may bring a level of life to this planet that is absolutely tremendous, spectacular. I want to see it if it happens. I would like to be there helping to build it. But anyway, those are my speculations on these things. Again, those are not actual. You can't say, show me the remote viewing session like I did with the other things.
Right.
There's no remote viewing sessions for this. I've taken the liberty of putting a bigger picture as I see it to all of this.
No, and I appreciate that. I have to say that, these are things that get talked about on Camelot all the time. So this is not unusual discussion matter, actually, for the people listening. And they'll be right there with you. There's constant talk about this. I think that what does get wrapped in here, to bring it back to the remote viewing sessions, is the idea, again, that what is it that remote viewing is actually capable of looking at? In other words, in reference to that exact thing. Because if it's not, it's kind of like if there's an elephant in the room and all the remote viewers are ignoring that elephant just by virtue of the nature of the elephant, as good as they are at their job, it may not fall into the purview of, per se, remote viewing as it's been understood or taught up until this point. Now, you're raising a good point. You're raising a point of whether it is possible for remote viewers to see things that are so dramatically different from their past training and from their own personal life experiences. Well, I mean, look at it this way. If they haven't been through the shift before, in other words, well, I mean, I'm a person who believes in reincarnation. So but in theory, and especially if this particular, as is said, that this particular shift for the planet is actually, it is similar to prior shifts, but it contains ingredients that have not been part of prior shifts. So that this time it's going to include some other things that are shifting consciousness, because consciousness itself is in another state and is more ready, more receptive to these other energies that are coming in, and that these energies that are coming in are perhaps even more specifically different enough so that the shift itself is different enough that these people haven't experienced it before. Now, time is not linear, as we know, and of course that's what really, in my view, facilitates seeing the future. And I have many what I call precog dreams of the future. But I also acknowledge that some of those dreams may be dreams of other timelines. And so this is why I don't get out with, and publish them out on talk shows and all of this, simply because of that caveat. but there is something to be said. I mean, I myself have had some dreams that I kind of classify as what are called, well, what I call ascension type dreams. Okay? And that means that they contain elements in them that are, in other words, the dream itself is enough like reality to be depicting reality, but there's a place within them where a shift is happening that's unlike anything else, and then you go into another level. And so it is quite fascinating. And some of these dreams may also be similar to some of the remote viewers' evidence. For example, I have seen places where there are no humans, okay? And I don't know why.
On Earth?
Yeah.
Okay, let me say one thing. If the theory of physics is correct that I've been developing with respect to remote viewing, then it is literally impossible to think of something that doesn't exist in some version of reality that's as equally real as the one you're experiencing here and now. That doesn't mean that you're going to experience that particular reality.
Right.
But you can't think of something that you can't put yourself into a state of superposition with. That means there must be a reality that does have those characteristics. And in some sense, even though it's not the reality that you will experience, it is an equally valid reality, and you or somebody else somehow does experience it.
Yeah, but what I guess what I'm trying to talk about a little bit, and it's actually going a little off the topic, but I just want to say it because you went in this direction. And I want to say that if you want to call it the shift or a shift, which has been talked a lot about, and I'm feeling actually the energetics happening on planet Earth now, I think it is happening now. I am experiencing it now. And it is well, escalating now. But aside from that, what I want to say is, isn't it possible that that's an event, just like you depicted? It's kind of like this, I guess, an elephant in the road of the timeline. It's gigantic, and so it has to impact all the timelines.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. The only thing I want to add is that I think your observation that the change is happening now is really good, for the following reason. If you look at the way we were after World War II in the 1950s, it was really quite a very stiff emotionality of the time period. We had very set patterns of thinking, very patriotic, very standard ways of thinking. I mean, you actually got away with statements like this in Congress, where a congressman or a senator would challenge another congressman or senator or a witness by saying, well, the president says this, now you're not going to counteract the president, are you? I mean, they actually got away with statements like that. There was a sort of a stiffness to the way of thinking. Now, if you go and look at us now, and it was a very physical sense of thinking back in those days. If you look at us now, you look at the changes that went through in the 60s and the 70s and 80s and 90s and now early 2000s. We're really much more of a cosmic society. There really is a change. So if I were to sort of say that everything is somehow based on the level of consciousness, that consciousness essentially is everything, that our consciousness now is much more spiritual than it used to be. It was much more physically focused than back in the 1950s, and then going all the way back, hundreds of years. And so in a very short period of time, we've become a much more spiritually flexible or spiritually fluent society. And that means that the frequencies that make us up now really are different in that level. We're really reaching higher. We're reaching for a higher level of vibratory nature than we were going back as long as we can remember as a collective society. So what's happened since the 1970s onward seems to be a process that's been going on that is really much different than we got all throughout centuries going back. So this thing that you're saying seems to be happening now, I would agree with that completely. It seems to be that we're in a process that's sort of a long-standing process, and maybe we're sort of in the middle of it. And so maybe it'll sort of top out the year 2050 or 2075 or something, to sort of end. But what I think is also happening is some of the sudden aspects that the remote viewing data are looking at. So there seems to be a combination of a long-term shift spanning maybe 100 years, and maybe we're sort of in the middle of it now, and that's what you're picking up in terms of the changes happening now. But there seems to be also a peak or an accent to this particular moment. And something seems to be gearing up for the post-2012 period. And the only thing I can think of, and I think in terms of electromagnetics a lot, is the pole shift. Now, I'm not at all talking about the Earth rotating and shifting its physical direction so that the North Pole goes where the South is. I'm not at all talking about that. I'm thinking that the Earth will continue spinning exactly as it's spinning now for, millions of years. But what I am thinking is happening is that the magnetic pole is moving, and that is not in at all dispute. But back in the 1970s, the magnetic North Pole used to be in the middle of Canada. And now it's really hiking. I mean, it's hiking faster than a fast jogger. I mean, it's going like 3 or 4 miles a year. And it's very close to the actual true north now. It's really moving quickly. And it looks like we're very close to the point where it will actually get very close to the true North Pole. And when that happens, what typically has apparently happened in the past is when the magnetic north gets close to the true north, it becomes a bit unstable and flips. Now, it doesn't flip 180 degrees, although it possibly could, because it's all done with this is magnet theory, dealing with the molten earth core, the iron core. But what is more likely to happen is that it will simply shift to someplace on the other side, like Siberia. So whereas before it was a little bit in the middle of Canada, it might end up in the middle of Russia. So sort of opposite ends, sort of the same distance it was from the North Pole, but in the direction of Canada, it will probably end up that same distance in the other side. That would probably place it somewhere in Russia. And when that happens, it will probably be rapid. Now, that doesn't mean that the Earth is going to shake. It just means that the compasses will move. And it's happening so fast now that the runways, I'm a pilot, and runways are identified by the direction that they land in. So if you see a runway called 20, that means it's in 200. It's pointed at the direction 200 degrees. Well, they're actually having to rename the runways now because the magnetic north is shifting so much. 200 is no longer pointing in 200. So the airplanes have to use their magnetic compasses to line up with the runway. But if the runway is not pointed in that direction because the magnetic north is no longer in the same spot, then the navigation doesn't work out right. And so they're actually repainting their runways. So when that flip happens, the key ingredient is when a flip happens, there'll be a period of time when the magnetic shield that surrounds the Earth will dramatically weaken. And it won't be like for decades. It'll be like, for some days, maybe weeks. And when that does happen, there'll be, if there is some type of galactic radiation that's coming through this part of the galaxy, it'll be able to get through really easy. And that would, because the magnetic shield that surrounds us would basically be non-operable. And in fact, the magnetic shield around the Earth is in fact weakening dramatically. So that's not in dispute. And so that sort of is another part of the puzzle that makes me think that we're going through some type of vibratory shift. The magnetic pole seems to be shifting, and if we are passing through an area of the galaxy, there seems to be two separate processes, but when they combine and form at about the same time, you get sort of the perfect storm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you bring in the possible incoming dark star or second sun, then you've got a whole nother scenario there, and we could go on about all of that. What we're kind of getting into the time here, and I've kept you for quite some time. I do want to ask you one of the questions that's in the chat, because I think it's valid here, and if we could, it's going to wrap us back into this discussion at hand a little bit. And what it is whether you could briefly review the other target sites not mentioned yet. And what they mean by that is in the more dire timelines, which is for 2013, what was seen in those other sites? If you could just review it briefly, so that we get the overview of everything.
Yeah, it's both a very interesting question, but it is late, and so I'm thinking the best way to do this would be to describe a particular spot and show the difference between the two spots, 2008 and 2013. And in this case, I think the best example would be Dick Algire's session for Honolulu, Hawaii, which is the KITV building where he works, because he's a celebrity newscaster. He's also one of the very best remote viewers on the planet. And when he did his 2008 session, that was very interesting, because his 2008 session was perfect, meaning he didn't know what the target was, of course, but he knows KITV. So when he remote viewed, he was familiar with the types of things that his perception would be exposing him to. So what did he see in 2008? And this is very important, because remote viewers can see anything, but the question is, can they understand what they see? So with regard to the 2008 target with KITV, you would expect him to totally be able to understand what he was seeing, because that was where he works. And in fact, that's exactly what he saw. I'm looking right now at the 2008 session for KITV. He gets all the people working in the building, all the metal stuff all around. He finds all the lights. He accurately draws all the lights that are in the building. These are all video lights. He describes how they are, and actually draws what the video lights look like. He has the people in the audience, the lights on the structure where the stage is, all the wiring that's for all of the lights. He has an absolute picture-perfect description of a cameraman. He actually draws the cameraman. He actually has a setting where the audience is there, and the lighting is all set up. You have the dark backgrounds with the lighting on the stage. And then he actually has the cameraman, which is spectacular. He's having a man standing in a small enclosed platform. He draws it exactly. He's working with the hand grip for the camera. The operator is intent on using the touch control for the camera. I mean, you can't get better. Okay? So that's his 2008 session. Now, mind you, he doesn't know anything about these targets when he's doing them. Okay, so let's go to the 2013 session, both timelines. We'll go to the timeline A, which is where the scientific community continues to refuse or to acknowledge the reality of remote viewing. And what he gets is land that's rocky. He gets the water. He gets the coastline. He gets exposed land, but there's things floating in the water, bobbing, refuse. The buildings aren't there. He gets a lot of small plant life, exposed rocks. Then he gets a lot of runoff water, running off from the land, running off back into the ocean. So I like to look at sessions like that and look at them in the grossest possible way and say, wow, that doesn't look like Honolulu anymore. And so let's look at the second timeline, timeline B, where the scientific community eventually does acknowledge the reality of remote viewing. Well, interestingly, he has a lot of people in this session, which he didn't have in the first session. So that makes me think maybe there's something about the scientific acknowledgement of remote viewing sort of puts everybody on guard to say, hey, look, something is happening, and we have to think spiritually. We have to think working together. That's how I interpret this, because he sees a lot of people here that he didn't see, that didn't show up. Now, remember, just because it doesn't report people doesn't mean that people weren't there, but I'm sort of taking liberties of saying the fact that he's drawing so many people here makes me think that there might be something to it. Anyway, there was some type of event, some type of pandemonium, a lot of debris. He draws the same debris as before, but there's people working together. They have structures that they are rebuilding, thatched roofs structures, making things out of debris. There's some despair. It's not really joyful activity in any way. A lot of people sweating. He writes, this is a sense that this is what we have to do, so just do it. Men and women...
Is there any volcanism? Because you're talking about Hawaii.
He's not describing any volcanism. He's describing sort of the aftermath. That doesn't mean... It really sort of looks more like... I'm sort of saying this sort of looks more like after a tsunami rather than after a volcano. But really, but that's just me... That's just me sort of interpreting it. You could look at these data yourself and maybe come up with the same type. But he does get people planting things. They're actually trying to grow things, food.
Okay. But he never pulled back the way
No, he didn't. He didn't do it. I know you'd like the answer to that, but I don't have it. I just don't have an answer to it.
But did other people? You have several other sessions that looked at that same place. Did they?
No, unfortunately, he was the only one that got to that target. You see, there was a long list of geographical locations, and these people were doing it for free. So I had to say, come on, did you get the next? I had to keep pushing them. Please send in your sessions. Send in your sessions. So we got a lot of sessions for Vaitupu Tuvalu. We got a lot of sessions for Fort Jesus Mombasa. We got a lot of sessions for Sydney Opera House. We got a lot of sessions for Mount Kilimanjaro. We got we got two people doing complete sets of sessions for the United States Congress building, which, by the way, according to these data, doesn't look like the United States Congress building in 2013. It doesn't. The data, these data don't look so good. And we've got two people doing sessions for the Male International Airport. We've got only one person doing sessions for KITV, which just happened to have been Dick Allgaier. And only Dick Allgaier, again, did sessions for Key West. He also happens to be one of the very best viewers on the planet Earth, however. So,
okay, for Key West, I know that because it's one of the few other places in the U.S., I know that there's a lot of U.S. listeners. What did the person get for the Key West? Was that up,
Sure, I can tell you that right away. Again, for those people in the Key West, this is not a prediction. This is just describing what these data say.
Sure.
This is the second timeline where where the scientific community does acknowledge. You do get the sense across a number of these sessions in the second timeline of people cooperating and working together, even though it's under very difficult circumstances. And you don't get that sense in the first timeline.
That's a fascinating...
it's more of an atomized sense. Okay, now I'm looking at the session right now, people working together. They're digging. They're walking in this type in a natural setting. It feels like there's a time change. He's noticing that, but it's almost like he's looking into the past, with people who are wearing sort of ornamental stuff. They almost looks like Native Americans with that type of clothing, sort of improvised clothing, bow and arrow type stuff. You have people in a corridor. You get sloping land that's not steeply sloping, but you have, it doesn't look like the Key West that you and I know, where there's buildings all over the place. And then he does notice, he widens his angle, he widens his lens and starts noticing that some gestalt or concept that's associated with this involved a very high energy source, meaning like I interpreted that as something like a meteor. But whatever disrupts whatever was there involved something where people were looking up in the sky and seeing a huge energy thing, which I sort of interpreted as a meteor. Okay, so here's some of the things that he actually writes. This target feels a bit out of place. It's not a place with high-tech energy. But there is some type of energy associated with it. Indoors, there's a smell of food, like fish, salted food. Women are getting involved. Older women are more patient. There's a lot of stress going on, and people have to deal with this and be patient with it. There's the people are essentially very scared, and they're trying to control that level of frightened, being scared. There's a lot of yelling, a lot of anger, a lot of there's some level of stampeding. He has bluffs, or he actually has water rolling off of the edge of the coast into the ocean, and he clearly says it's a bay. It's like the ocean, like in a bay, and he writes that. He has people emerging from a structure in a group, and they run into some areas that are boarded off so that they can't get past it, like like a fence, like a wire fence, and they have to push it down. They're like people tried to stop them, to coordinate, sort of to stop the masses from getting someplace, and they have to break down the fence. They're pushing and shoving and knocking the fence down to get to these places. It's that type of a thing. It's there, and his other session for the same target, but for the first timeline, he had people hunting for food, basically cooking whatever they can catch. So you have the breakdown of the food transport system. That's what he's getting for Key West. Now, according to my theory, you can't think of anything or perceive something and have it not exist in some reality. The question is it going to happen in our reality? So if this event that seems to be post-2012 is sufficiently big, then it would happen in some degree in our reality. Maybe not just like these sessions, but some element of these sessions would sort of match up with what we're moving into, if in fact the event is sufficiently large that it affects many timelines. By the way, I'm looking at the other session. He does have some more information on the other session. This is timeline A. And in this one, he does have a lot of people also in this one, but he also pulls back his mind to a more wide angle, and he actually has a sketch where he has something that has huge levels of energy that comes down from above and impacts, really looks, creating huge levels of heat. And so it really, to me, I'm looking at it on his S3, which is a stage 3 of the session. It really looks like a meteor impact to me. I mean, I can't imagine anything else that would be, but it really looks like a meteor impact to me.
And where is this session taking place that you're looking at?
This is Dick Algire's session for Key West, Florida, timeline A, which is the session. It's all these sessions are available for free on the web, which is the timeline for when the scientific community continues to refuse to acknowledge the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon.
Okay. So, Courtney, what I'd like to do now, you're saying these sessions are visible on the web where people...
Oh, we always document everything. Let me just go to another...
but can we...
Actually, can I put this particular picture
Sure.
on Skype so you can see it?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Okay, I mean, sometimes a picture says 1,000 words, and so,
But what I'd like you to also do is give us the URL where people can access this.
everything is at farsight.org. We're a nonprofit.
Right.
FARSIGHT.org, www. So on.
Uh-huh.
And there's a big thing right on our homepage that says, actually, what does it say? Let me click to it. It's a good question. What does it exactly say? It says, the 2012 remote viewing experiment, climate change, multiple timelines, and events.
Okay.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Oh, actually, it should be on your... So if I click on that, you'll see the page that opens up that says Post-2012 Earth Changes.
Okay, so that's where people get the visuals for all of this, right?
Yeah, but a lot of actually, I have heard so many people complain that when they come to the website for the Farsight Institute, that we have most websites are advertisements for something, and there's very little content on a lot of websites. Your website actually is filled with content, so people who go to your website are really used to the idea, having to navigate through it to see everything. Well, our website is similar in the sense that there are so many science projects. That's why I really recommend to people to start with the DVD of the Farsight experiments, because really, we designed it so that you won't be overwhelmed. Put it all together, and the climate project is described in detail and this project, the Post-2012 project, is on that DVD. So that's the best place to go.
Okay.
But let's actually go to this page on this session. This is for Timeline A, where the scientific community continues to refuse to acknowledge the reality of remote viewing. And this is just one sketch in it, but he widened his lens enough to pick up the origin of this energy thing that caused all this bad stuff to happen in this Key West target. So do you see it? You see this arcing trajectory? It impacts the water. Then he writes, secondary waves of energy radiate, seems to almost ignite things with flames, with a lot of kinetic energy, fast-moving energy. And then it moves into thermal energy. So we're talking about waves hitting water, something hitting water, creating... And if a meteor did impact, now mind you, he doesn't say the word meteor, but I don't know what else to call it. It just seems to me like, hey, this looks like a meteor. But it looks like clearly something's coming in, hitting the water. Same type of thing we get with Sydney, and same type of thing we get with Mombasa, causing like tidal waves. But also whenever you have an impact to something like that, you get, scientists often call it similar to like a thermonuclear reaction. A big meteor hitting causes like a lot of heat. That's what he's describing, so that's how I'm interpreting this.
Yes.
You take a look at the picture yourself. I mean, how would you describe it? I don't know. That's what I'm... And then you see how people are sort of organizing here, pulling things, trying to do things. And now look here. Look at this next one. Do you see this picture here? A lot of people, there's a lot of energy. Do you see this picture where he says there's a lot of unexpected energy that's radiating out? Some people are knocked down. They feel exposed or caught out in the open. And the energy is exposing people. Mm-hmm. And then look what he writes. He says now there's an urge to flee. People are running. How am I supposed to interpret this? This seems to me like something, and we're getting this in so many sessions. 20 out of 38, or something like about half, more than half in both timelines. And none of this happens in the 2008 one. So what am I supposed to do?
Okay, now I'm going to ask you one more question, and then actually I think that we should close this down because we've
really that's probably a good idea.
A while, and you've been extremely patient with us.
Well, actually, can I add one little final thing before the question?
Absolutely.
Look at this page that I'm looking at right now. What is he saying? I got a sense of food preparation, primitive and unappealing, some kind of grain mashed into gravel with mortar and pestle, boiled in something, and they may not have metal. Plants like weeds are gathered and added. It seems not very appetizing. roast meat, whatever small game they can find, and obtain over a smoky fire, and he actually draws the stuff. Kerry, what am I supposed to do to interpret this? I mean, do we really need to have a lot of sophistication in interpreting this? This looks like a bad day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't get this in the 2008 session. So what am I supposed to say? So I'm sort of thinking, no, I'm sorry, no, I shouldn't have cut you off. What was your last question?
Oh, no, well, I did want to ask you one last question here before we try to close this down. Someone is asking about parallels between an out-of-body travel and remote viewing. I guess they want to understand whether or not they are coming close to that kind of thing.
The best place that studies, to my knowledge, out-of-body experiences is the Monroe Institute in Faber, Virginia. Skip Atwater used to be in the DIA's military program, that same one that Lynn Buchanan came out of. And that was in a, and they have an interest in remote viewing, but really their real interest is in out-of-body. And that's a different type of experience. That's where your consciousness seems to lift out of the body and go somewhere else, almost like your ghost goes someplace. I have actually gone to the Monroe Institute and taken a good deal of their training. I actually think it's very fun. I like to include it as part of remote viewing training because it exposes you to so many new ideas so easily. And then when you come back and do remote viewing, you sort of have that depth that you didn't really have before because you don't have to be sort of taught about everything indirectly. You can actually experience a lot of stuff. But remote viewing and out-of-body are different because with remote viewing, your consciousness stays focused in your own self. You're not in an altered state. You're not using any type of sound signals like they use with the hemisync sounds at the Monroe Institute to sort of force an out-of-body experience or urge or encourage an out-of-body experience. You're really just like the way you are now, normal, and with remote viewing. And what you do is you get trained to shift your attention to an aspect of yourself where perceptions are actually coming in all the time, but you normally ignore them. So with remote viewing, you're in a normal waking state, but you're shifting perceptions to these feelings that we often think of as intuitive, our intuitive feelings. But if you really focus on them well, you get more than just intuitions. You get pictures and images and stuff like that. But you're still in the here and now, in your own body, centered, focused. So it's not the same experience as an out-of-body experience.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's very, very accurate. What I'd like to do at this point is close this down because we've been going for quite some time. And we will do this again, Courtney. I will have you back. We'll do a radio show again and just discuss as we were talking about, the more physics of remote viewing and so on and so forth. But I think this has been fascinating for people, and I guess they do understand where they can go on your website to get the information now. And thank you so much. The
best thing to do is just to go right to our website and just simply look, which is farsight.org. It's like seeing far, F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T. And again, the DVD, The Farsight Experiments, is what we designed to make that gap, to bridge the gap so that you hit the ground running and you know what we're doing. And it's designed especially to explain it. And it does include the big projects such as the one we talked about tonight.
Okay. And I guess the last question some people were asking, do you have any projects set for the near future? In other words, are you looking at expanded versions of 2012 or 2013 or, things like that?
Well, my first response is, are you kidding? Of course we have something percolating. And the second response is, it's not a complete secret because I'm going to be talking a little bit about it this coming weekend at the International Remote Viewing Association. but we have one of the biggest things that you've ever heard of coming. It was one of the most interesting projects we've ever done. And we actually focused on and we have good, solid data for it, remote viewing data, and physical imagery for it, of a past human civilization on Earth that wiped itself out 70,000 years ago. And it was even a little bit more advanced than us. Not much, but a little. And they destroyed themselves. They were experimenting with an energy source that was really clean, and they messed up.
Okay, and was this Atlantis, what people know of as Atlantis?
I think a lot of people would like to call it that. It certainly fits that description, but we actually now know the whole picture, and we've got it matched with genetic information, how many people survived. We know everything, and I am working on. I have a bit of a trouble with this one because the data are so good, and it matches what we know from the geneticists so well, and it matches what we know from the geologists so well, that it's such a big project. I'm a videographer also. Mostly I'm a mathematician, but I also do videography, and the university that I work at allows me to teach one sort of non-math related course a year. And one of those courses that I teach that's non-math related is videography, political videography. And so I make a lot of videos. But when I got these data, my original plan was just to make a video of it. But the project is so big, and the results are so spectacular, and the information cuts across so many disciplines, and it's so good and so solid. And we even have what looks like clear evidence of a governmental attempt to suppress the information when we were coming to the end of our project, meaning they were looking at what we were doing. We do know that for a fact. And there apparently was an effort to get rid of some of the evidence of this stuff just as we were wrapping things up. So, I mean, you couldn't get anything better. It was just, it's picture perfect. And it's really, the thing that I've been worried about most with regard to this thing is it's such a big thing. I sort of wish I was working in collaboration with James Cameron or some larger filmmaker, maybe with the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, that could put some extra resources into it. Because we have the videography capabilities, but we don't have the money that can do things on location. We can't fly places and do. And we really, this project is so big, it could easily be a Discovery Channel 2-hour series. And the data are so incredible. And it matches with so many else, and it changes so much of the way everybody thinks.
Well, you should write a pitch, send it to me, and I'll see if I can help you try to find some getting out. Actually, it out there.
Do you know some people at the Discovery Channel or History Channel or something like that?
Not personally, but I may know people who know people.
Yeah. Well, that might be something we'll talk about it.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
But anyway, otherwise I'm doing the video myself, and we have the data, we have it ready to go, and I think people are expecting like 2 or 3 months turnaround on this thing. I don't know if I'll be able to do something like that, but it would be nice to have a much bigger budget.
Okay, well, it sounds fascinating, and
it's a long answer to your question. That yes, are we doing something new? We're always doing something new. The only thing that's different is how big this something new actually is.
Okay. Well, I think everyone will be fascinating, and hopefully we can reconvene and do something on that when time is right and things are ready to go. And assuming we do this before anything impending happens in 2013, if
that's the other issue,
is actually going to happen. So all of that's up in the air at the moment, but I guess we'll find out.
We'll find out.
So thank you so much, Courtney Brown. And
Thank you, Kerry.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Revolution Radio and American Freedom Radio, for making this possible. And thank you for everyone who did contribute financially. We will be splitting the money that came in for this event with Courtney and the Farsight Institute, so that will help him with his work and to continue doing his work and ours as well. And also pay my webmaster, Tommy, for his very long hours behind the scenes here, and as always. So thank you.
Thank you, Kerry, and thank you for inviting me especially. And thank you all the listeners who lasted all this time listening to this program.
Okay. All right. Take care and
okay.
Keep in touch.
Great. Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.